The production of Friday After Next in 2002 brought together, on a single film set in Los Angeles, a collection of people whose careers had been built in very different rooms. Ice Cube, who had conceived and produced the Friday franchise, had come to Hollywood through music, through a career in hip-hop that had made his name before any film set was part of the picture. Katt Williams, who joined the cast in what would become one of his most recognized early film roles, had come from the comedy circuit, from clubs and theaters, from the specific tradition of live stand-up performance in which the only thing that mattered was what happened between a comedian and a room on any given night. Two people, two completely different paths, one film set. Between one of the afternoon scenes, during one of the breaks that punctuate any film production, the technical pauses that accumulate into significant stretches of unstructured time on even the most efficiently run sets, the two of them ended up outside together. Not because either of them had planned a particular conversation, not because the break had been scheduled as an opportunity for the kind of exchange that followed, simply because they were both in the same exterior space at the same time, both removed from whatever was being adjusted or reset or prepared inside, and the particular quality of a film set in a break creates the conditions for conversations that more organized environments rarely produce. The crew members who were nearby, the ones whose jobs kept them in the vicinity of that exterior space during the break, have described what they observed in ways that share a common quality. The conversation lasted longer than a break usually does. In most productions, performers use breaks the way everyone else uses breaks, briefly, for water, for phones, for the particular rest that comes from stepping out of the specific kind of attention that performing in front of a camera requires. This conversation didn't do that. It extended past the point where the break would normally have concluded. The accounts from the crew members who were in the vicinity don't agree on what specifically was discussed. This is unsurprising. Conversations observed from a distance, heard in fragments over the ambient noise of a production set, are not accurately transcribed by anyone who wasn't directly part of them. What the accounts do agree on is the texture of the conversation, the way both men seemed to be saying things they had actually thought about, rather than the kind of surface exchange that fills most between-takes time on a film set. The quality of their attention to each other. The fact that neither of them seemed to be performing anything. That last quality is worth noting. Both Ice Cube and Katt Williams were, by this point in their careers, people who knew how to perform. Performing was, in different ways for each of them, the central activity of their professional lives. They understood what performance looked like and what its absence looked like, because they had spent years in rooms where the difference between the two determined everything. When people who understand performance that well are in a conversation that isn't one, when the camera is off and the microphone is silent and there is no audience to play to, something in the quality of the exchange is different. It becomes obvious to anyone watching that what they're seeing is not a scene, but a conversation. The conversation in that exterior space, by all accounts, was a conversation. Not a performance of one, not two people occupying the same space and saying the things that the situation seemed to require. Two people finding, in the compressed and temporarily unstructured time of a production break, something worth actually talking about. What the crew members who were nearby remember most specifically is not what was said, but a particular moment toward the end of the break when someone came to indicate that the next setup was ready. Both men looked up at the same time, acknowledged the signal, and then, before moving toward the set, one of them said something to the other that produced a response from the other that was not a laugh, but was not entirely serious either. The specific reaction of someone who has just heard something they recognize as true, said in a way they hadn't expected. To understand what made that particular conversation worth remembering, it helps to understand what Ice Cube and Katt Williams actually had in common, which was not, on the surface, immediately obvious. Ice Cube had built his career through music, in a tradition that valued authenticity above almost everything else. The hip-hop that had made his name in the late 1980s and early 1990s was music that insisted on a particular relationship to its own origins, that the voice on the record had to be recognizable as coming from a real place, from a real experience, from a perspective that hadn't been constructed for consumption. The power of that music came precisely from the sense that it couldn't have come from anywhere else. It was too specific to be general, too grounded to be borrowed, too internally consistent to be imitated. When Ice Cube transitioned into film, first as an actor and then as a producer, he brought that framework with him. The Friday franchise, which he created, was grounded in a specific community, a specific street, a specific neighborhood, a specific way of inhabiting the world. And the authenticity of that grounding was what made it resonate. Katt Williams had built his career through stand-up comedy in a tradition that demanded exactly the same thing from a different direction. Stand-up comedy, at the level where it becomes something more than skilled entertainment, is built on a voice specific enough that it could only have come from the person delivering it. A comedian who can be imitated, whose perspective can be borrowed, whose observations can be reproduced by someone without their experience, is a comedian who hasn't yet found the thing that makes their work irreplaceable. The circuit rewards specificity in exactly the way that hip-hop rewards it. The more precisely a performer's work reflects a real and particular way of seeing the world, the more universal the response to it becomes. Two performers, then, who had arrived at their careers from different directions, but through the same understanding of what makes art real. That understanding, the shared belief that a voice has to come from somewhere actual, that authenticity is not a style, but a structural requirement, is what the conversation in that exterior space was navigating, even if neither man was describing it in those terms. In the larger context of Katt Williams's career, the Friday After Next film holds a specific place. It was an early film appearance that introduced him to audiences well beyond the comedy circuit, associating his name with a franchise that had already built a substantial following and a particular identity. His performance in the film, the character he played, the energy he brought to it, the way he occupied the scenes he was in, was widely noticed by people who hadn't previously encountered his stand-up work and produced a specific kind of recognition. The recognition of encountering a performer whose presence is distinctive enough to register immediately in any context. But what the film captured, what any film captures of any performer, is a fixed version of something that was, in reality, in motion. The performances on the circuit during this period, the sets being developed and refined in clubs across the country, the voice being assembled through years of live work, none of that was visible to the audience watching Friday After Next. What was visible was the version of Katt Williams that fit within the frame of that particular production, a frame that the conversation in the exterior space, during the break between takes, was outside of entirely. Outside of the frame, in the unmediated space of a production break, was the conversation between two people who had built their careers on exactly the same principle, that the work has to come from somewhere real, finding, briefly and without planning it, that they understood each other in the specific way that people understand each other when they share a framework they never had to explain. The film came out. The performances were what they were. The production moved on, as productions do, into the next project, and the next, and the one after that. But the crew members who were in the vicinity of that exterior space during that particular afternoon break have held on to what they witnessed there, in the way people hold on to things that didn't fit into any category they had available at the time, and still don't quite fit into one now. Two people, a film set, an overrun break, and the specific quality of a conversation that happens when two performers who understand what real sounds like find it, briefly, in each other. That's the part of the story that never made it into any production record. It happened between takes. No camera was on.